Thank you, Kurt. And good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to Writing for the Legislative Audience. I want to thank all of you for participating. We have 500 lines hooked up and somewhere between 800 and 1,000 participants, and I'm pretty sure that's an NCSL webinar record. I want to thank the Legislative Staff Coordinating Committee and all of the NCSL staff sections and the Education Network for co-sponsoring this event. And I especially want to thank Kay Warnock, Risa Jones, and the rest of the NCSL staff for their efforts in making sure this program became a reality. As state legislatures tighten their budget belts, staff travel is one of the first items eliminated. It is so good to know that NCSL is available and has the tools to continue to provide legislative staff with quality staff professional development training. Now on with our program. I am so pleased to introduce Stan Stenersen to you today. Stan is a very good friend to NCSL and to legislative staff throughout the country. He has provided writing workshops for NCSL and other organizations for several decades. Early in his career, he taught technical writing and composition at the university level, and he later worked for legislative agencies at both the state and federal levels, spending most of these years at the Government Accountability Office, where he specialized in helping analysts develop reports and testimony for the United States Congress. Now retired, he continues to operate his own training and consulting business. He is also an adjunct faculty member at the University of Washington's Evans School of Public Affairs and at GAO's Center for Performance and Learning. And we are honored that he is with us today. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Stan Stenersen.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And I'm your disembodied voice for the next 90 minutes. Welcome to everyone wherever you are around the country. Before we get started with the actual material, a couple of housekeeping issues. One is that you might be looking at these slides at some point and say, boy, these slides look awfully bland. We've got 500 connections here, and in order to make sure that these slides all work on a variety of media, I'm trying to keep things very simple. And you will see that I will be taxing the limits of what your presentation media probably can do, because later on I'll be asking you to read a couple of paragraphs on the screen. The second thing, though, that I want to the housekeeping issue is the write-ups that you ought to have. NCSL emailed 3 pages of write-ups to you, and they're an important part of this webinar. Now, I teach graduate students at the University of Washington, and my guess is that out there, if we've got 800 to 1,000 people, you probably fit into one of 3 groups. One is the group that says, yep, got them, read them, I'm ready to go on them. Good for you. I hope most of you are in that group. Some of you may fit in the group that says, I got them somewhere, and I'm looking around for them as quickly as I can find them, because I haven't read them yet. Well, for those of you who may be in that category, I would suggest that you read item 1, which is called Good Start Program, while I'm talking with you here, because in about 5 minutes we'll be dealing with that particular write-up. And then there's probably a third group out there. I hope it's a small group, but a group that says, what write-ups? Well, if you can, download these. You can't download these by clicking on what you see on the screen now. It's not interactive that way. And if you are worried about risking losing the connection, download these afterwards. I do think they will be helpful for you, and there probably will be a few spots, if you don't have these materials, where you may feel a bit left out, but it doesn't mean you won't be able to participate. Okay, so let's go on to the content. What are we going to cover? Well, I knew in developing this webinar that I'd be dealing with a variety of people out there, people working in a lot of different offices, and the registration material certainly confirmed that. We have people in audit and evaluation agencies and research agencies. We have bill drafters. We have personal staff. We have people of all kinds. And what that means is you've got different kinds of writing tasks. In deciding what to cover here, I tried to pick a writing task that I think relates to all of us at one point or another. And that's what you see up there on the screen right now. Conveying complex information to readers who are in a hurry. And some of you are probably looking at that and saying, yeah, that's a shorthand description of my job description. Okay, so that's our focus, doing this particular task. Now, having worked with a number of your offices and been there to teach, I also know there's a lot of variation in what your legislatures expect of you, how you as agencies have decided to format your information, and in a lot of other ways. So I should tell you right up front that I'm definitely not here to tell you how to write or perhaps to change what you're doing. What I want to do in the 90 minutes that I've got with you is to set in perspective the challenge that you're facing, because you are indeed facing a major challenge here. When you are conveying complex new information to readers who are in a hurry, you're in the teaching business. You might say, well, I don't do a webinar, or I don't stand up in front of a class. Yes, you do. That's what your writing does. It has to be able to teach. And teaching someone something in writing is difficult work. Cognitive scientists, the people who study brains and how we go about thinking, have pretty much decided that that's the hardest mental activity there is. So congratulations, you wandered in your job to the hardest job that there is to do. Let's see if I can give you some perspective on how difficult it is by focusing not necessarily on you, but on your audience. Up on the screen right now is a headline from an article that appeared in the New York Times in 2005. It says, "Literacy falls for graduates from college, testing finds." Now, we're not talking here about whether somebody can read. What we're talking about is whether somebody can read something, understand it, and apply it. That's what we hope our audience can do with our stuff. And the available evidence, I'm sorry to tell you, shows that many readers can't do that. The results are really quite sobering. The test that we're talking about here was a test administered or developed by the U.S. Department of Education called the National Assessment of Adult Literacy. It's a very good test. It's given to about 16,000 people. When the test was administered in 1992, about 40% of all people, or of all college graduates, were proficient. And I'm reading from the article here because this is the definition of proficiency. Proficiency means that people are able to read lengthy, complex English texts and draw complicated inferences. 40% were able to do that. 10 years later, when the test was administered again, only 31% were proficient. Now, of course, the article was talking about, oh, isn't this a steep decline? I look back in 1992 and say, hey, less than half is pretty tough. That alone is a difficulty. We have a lot of people who have difficulty understanding what we write. Now, you might say, well, he explained what proficient was, and that sounded, it said reading lengthy, complex text. We try to keep things simple. So maybe our stuff isn't at that proficient level. Well, again, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Here is what the test was looking for at the proficient level. Things like people's ability to compare viewpoints in two editorials, or to interpret a table about blood pressure, age, and physical activity. Our stuff is at the proficient level. And what the research shows is about 1/3 of our target audience has the capability of understanding this at any one time. Now, I'm not here trying to rail against the educational establishment or anything like that. What I'm trying to do here is to give you an illustration of how hard it is to accomplish your task. You've got an audience out there that has a really tough time learning things that are as complicated as what we throw at them. Now, there might be a lot of reasons for that. People not paying attention, people maybe not being very smart, but one contributing factor is what I want to cover today, and that is poor packaging. Clearly, when things are packaged poorly, learning goes down. It's the one thing that we can control. So we've got to make sure that we organize in ways that make it easy rather than difficult for readers to understand. What I want to do with you today is really two main things. I want to talk about some problems that develop with a package and why those problems occur, and suggest to you some strategies, perhaps, for avoiding or at least minimizing those kinds of problems. Now, to help start the discussion about what helps and what hinders, let's look at that Good Start example, that item 1 that that NCSL sent out to you. So if you take item 1, find it, have it around. This is a one-page, for those of you who don't have it, this is a one-page write-up about a program called Good Start. What I want you to do is to assume that this write-up is a sort of mini report. It's intended for issuing to the legislature or legislative committee, as well as to interested members of the public. The legislative analyst, in this case, has identified what he or she thinks is a major problem in how the program is administered. And this write-up is designed to acquaint readers with the program, explain the program, and hopefully prompt some attention to fixing the problem. Now, I hope you have had a chance to read this, either today or before this. And here's your first chance to participate. I'm asking you, from your standpoint, how well do you think this works? And what you will find is, at this point, is a little voting panel will crop up on your screen, but will allow you to tell us whether you think it's outstanding, it's good enough to go, it needs some work, or it needs a lot of work. You'll have that up on the screen here in just a couple of seconds, I think, if it's not there now. Now, some of you are in big groups. You've got 100 people and you're not around a computer. This is coming through a projector and you have no opportunity to vote. That's okay. For those of you who can vote, go ahead, send this in. But my suggestion for all of you who are in groups, forget the voting. Don't worry about that. Get together with 2 or 3 people around you and talk about what your assessment is. I'm going to give you about a minute for this. For those of you in groups, just to compare notes, and for those of you who are voting, to vote. I will be quiet for about 1 minute, and then we'll get back together and see what you thought. Okay, I'm back. That should be about enough time. Let's see how you ended up voting. I think our results will come up here in a couple of minutes as soon as technically we can do that.
Yep, Stan will have that for you in just about 10 seconds.
Okay, very good. For those of you discussing this, those 2 questions on the other side are not necessarily meant to be things for you to send in responses to. These are the sorts of things that you might think about in terms if you had to give feedback to this writer. What do you see here that's strong? What do you see here that's weak? Okay, and here's our vote. And as you can see from the vote totals, our writer is not doing very well. Almost all of you are saying this document needs work, and over half of you who have voted are saying it needs a lot of work. I've used this in live groups as well, and this seems to be where this particular thing scores in just about every time that we do it. We have some basic questions about this. The kinds of things, Kurt, I've got it back. The kinds of questions that we have are things like, okay, where are we going in this document? I'm kind of lost. How much of this do I really need to know? It seems like I've got a lot of stuff here. And how is all this stuff connected? Now, your response to this might be, well, this is just a bad piece of writing. But as somebody who's worked as an editor and a report coach in a legislative setting for better than 30 years, I can say it's not an unusual example. In fact, I created this example from an actual one that a writer had carefully reviewed. Actually, several people had looked at it before it got sent in. It's easy to see in this case because it's not our stuff. It's not our stuff. It's somebody else's stuff. The late George Carlin said that his best comedy bit was a bit he did about a house. And maybe you know that, but I'll tell you a little bit about that. He defined a house as a place where you put your stuff, or you're out getting more stuff. And he says, you know, have you noticed how you walk around your house and you say, man, I've got good stuff in my house. And you go to another house and you might have a very different opinion of the stuff that you see in that other house. This stuff is junk. Now, Carlin uses different words to describe that stuff, which is why I don't use this as his actual bit here. But that stuff is junk. My stuff's good. That stuff is junk. We can look at this write-up and say, a lot of this stuff that I see is junk. But when our own writing comes into play, we often say, wait a minute, all that stuff is good. I wouldn't have put it in there if it wasn't good. Don't touch my stuff. No, the rules are the same in both cases. But also when we look at this draft, we also find many good qualities to the draft. The writer has a command of a lot of facts, and from the standpoint of writing, this is grammatically correct. It's fairly strong in that regard. We've got a smart, good writer who basically, in terms of the score, is O for the webinar. Almost no one is willing to send this out the door. Now, why does that happen? This is a good writer, a product that doesn't teach us very well, and the chance of anything happening if this draft went out the door is not very good. Well, let's put that one aside, though I'll tell those of you who maybe haven't read these materials before the webinar, in about 30 minutes we'll be coming up to item 2. So go ahead and read that as we're going through these other materials here. So what went wrong? Well, we're going to talk about the problem from 3 different perspectives. The first one involves a conflict between what we as writers want to do and what our readers often want from us. And that kind of thing can best be seen, I think, in a contrast between what I'm going to call busy readers and earnest writers. Now, I put a slide up here that gives you an idea of what we know from research about what busy readers are after. Busy readers often want brevity. As a member of my legislative committee in an agency where I used to work said, I have time to read 1/3 of what I absolutely have to read. Busy readers want brevity. And if you're thinking of being a busy reader, you might think of how you look at a newspaper or how you look at a news site, perusing it on your computer. Oftentimes when we look at a newspaper, what we want is the bottom line first. We want the headline. We'll decide how much detail to read based on how interested we really are. Then, too, in lots of documents that we read as busy readers, we might be very interested in knowing 1 or 2 things about that in detail, but what we need to do is to be able to skim and pause and find that piece of information. I know when I am on the road, as I am now in Denver, from Seattle where my home is, I'm always reading the USA Today, and I always go to that little page that tells something about every single state, okay? I live in Washington State, and while I've been in Alaska and Alabama and taught people there, and I like your states, frankly, on a day-to-day basis, I don't want to know what those little snippets are. I want to know what the snippet is for Washington. And if USA Today doesn't package it in a way that I can go straight to Washington, I'm not going to spend the time with it. Also, as busy readers, we're very interested in anecdotes, stories. We know that because we know from research, for example, that the second most read item in a newspaper are the captions underneath photographs. We pay attention to that kind of information. Now let me contrast that with what we often do as earnest writers. One of the things that's important to us as legislative research and the like staff is accuracy and completeness. I happen to know this from my own agency, GAO, where I worked for 25 years. We did a survey to find out what are our core values. And what we found out was that the average analyst out there, the #1 core value for a GAO employee was accuracy and completeness. We might sound dull, but you can take what we say to the bank. That's good. That's important. It's a necessary part of what we do. But when you look across the screen, you will probably see that it's very difficult to be accurate and complete and brief at the same time. Our number one concern is often in conflict with a busy reader's number one concern. The same thing is true for the other things. We go through steps to go about our analysis, and we come to the point. That's exactly how the Good Start writer did it. The point is there somewhere in the draft, but if you look at it and read it a couple of times, you'll discover it's right there at the end. Everything points to that last sentence. Our readers want it the opposite way. We're very concerned about how things hold together, so we're looking item by item, and we have a great interest in data. And as you look across the screen, I think you'll see some of the conflicts there. In short, there are some basic conflicts maybe between what we as writers want to do and what our readers really want. But that contrast alone doesn't explain why you had a problem with Good Start write-up. I could say, slow down, read the Good Start one earnestly, and you'd still have trouble with it. So let's move to a consideration, the second consideration, which is really how much a reader's brain can handle. Now to do that, let's assume that you're driving in a strange city and you're downtown and you're lost. I'm in Denver today. Denver, like most cities in the United States, is a comfortable place to drive around most of the time. It's rectangular. Things run north and south and east and west. But if you know anything about downtown Denver, you know that once you get there, all bets are off. Rectangles become triangles. Their one-way streets mess you up, and you make about 2 turns, and suddenly you can't tell what's north and what's south. And so let's say you have an address that you're trying to find in the car. Now you're totally lost, and you roll down the window, and you ask a person, hey, how do I get to such and such address? And that person says, oh, no problem. Go straight ahead for 2 blocks, then left 1 block, and you're there. Boy, have you lucked out. It's your lucky day. Those are easy instructions. You say, thanks a lot. And as you go, maybe you say, okay, straight 2, left 1, and you get there. But suppose instead what you hear is this. Let's see. You go straight ahead for 2 blocks, and then you go 1 block to the left, and then you have to go right again for 3 blocks. And then you go left and right after 3 blocks, and you're there. You're in trouble. Your first thought is probably, could you say that again? And your second thought is perhaps, can I get a piece of paper? You're in trouble. You're overloaded. Your brain can't manage that much information. Somehow in moving from the first entry to the second entry, your brain has gotten into some territory that it can't manage. There's something here that you need to know about the different kinds of memories that we have and the different kinds of memories that we use. We actually have 2 different kinds of memories. Long-term memory, which you see up there on the screen on your right, that's where you put those directions once you've learned them. It's basically where things are stored. It's where you put your stuff, so you can go out and get more stuff. In Carlin's phrase, there's your house. Okay? Short-term memory, the stuff on your left, or what a lot of researchers call working memory, that's where you accumulate and store a limited number of facts so you can understand the idea behind them and move that idea into long-term memory. Okay? That's what happens. The person who gave you the directions had all of that stuff in his long-term memory, so it was really easy for him to say it. You're trying to understand it in short-term memory, and it doesn't work. You know, here you're not in your house. You're on a shopping trip going out to get some more information. Let's see if we can apply this to the Good Start example. Welcome to the house. You just walked inside our writer's brain. And what you're looking at with all those little yellow stickies are all the facts that the writer has assembled about Good Start. It's all there. It's all in the house. This is where everything has been stored, all those little stickies. And the writer says, I've got to write this piece up. And as a writer, I get to move through all of those little yellow stickies in the ways that you see the arrows moving at this point. Retrieving that information is easy, and thoughts jump all over the place. It's stream of consciousness. You get to access it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you get to do. And the nice thing about it is that when you get tired of doing it, you can say, stop. I'm going to think about what I'm going to do this weekend instead. Now, the writer in this case, having thought all this stuff through, says, well, I can't write it this way because I jumped around a lot and I got to organize it. maybe put things in background and then make things flow, and maybe what he or she comes up with something like you see on the screen in front of you now. Starting up on the top, going through some background information, then finally the box with the asterisks at the end. That's really how Good Start is organized. It all points towards that last sentence. Everything points there. So why didn't you learn it? Why did you say it needs a lot of work in order for me to understand it? It's because when you come to this, you're not in your house. You're out there on your shopping trip. You're in the short-term memory. The short-term memory, that working memory, is very small. It's limited in its capacity. Research shows it can hold about 7 bits of information. It can pay attention for about 30 seconds. And the limits that you've seen already in trying to respond to that second set of directions. Okay, so and here's the way it works. Let's say I'm going to give you a yellow sticky here. Have a fact. Have some more facts. Have some more facts. And they're going to keep accumulating one by one. And right now I've got about 5 of them sitting there in your short-term memory. Now, most of the time when we get material, it goes in one ear and out the other. Obviously, for the set of directions, we're going to have to remember everything, or we're in trouble. But in most situations, we discard or forget a lot of things as soon as we hear them. We don't memorize. But we do learn. And the way we learn, researchers have found, is we take those 5 things and we translate them into something that researchers call a chunk. It's our interpretation of what that stuff meant. The chunk goes into long-term memory. Working memory clears out. We're able to get some more stuff. Okay? So learning works when it moves chunk by chunk by chunk. But suppose the input is different. Let's say we take our 5 items, and then instead of stopping there, we just keep adding. Have some more, have some more, have some more, have some more. Now notice what happened to the little box. It didn't change. Short-term memory doesn't get any bigger. Physiologically, it's limited in what it can handle. But the writer is busy cramming all of this additional information in. Your brain is now in trouble. Bells are ringing, lights are flashing, and your brain adopts a defensive posture. And I think you can guess what the defensive posture is. That's the defensive posture. Been there, didn't learn that. The information gets dumped, and the learning goes on. If you have to understand something, as in the set of directions, you start over, but if there's less need for it, you simply dump it. Now, you might think, well, all of what Stan's talking about here really doesn't apply to me. This long-term memory business doesn't matter, because I could care less if people could remember tomorrow what I'm trying to tell them in a document today. And my response is it longer than a paragraph? Does it take more than 30 seconds to read it? If so, you have to worry about this. The long-term memory doesn't necessarily mean what people will remember tomorrow, or next week, or next year. It's basically where we put stuff so we can go out and get some more stuff. That's what it is. And what happened in Good Start, in paragraph 1, what you saw was basically that. Paragraph 1, the writer kept saying, have a fact, have some more, have some more. And your response was, that's a lot of stuff. I'm not quite sure what it was. And perhaps your response was this. And what the writer tried to do was to take that whole organizational pattern and put it into your short-term memory. Because in the writer's mind, it's all one chunk. It all points to that last sentence. And he believes that it's carefully organized, that it will flow, and you'll get it. Nope, your short-term memory gets overloaded. There are multiple paragraphs in that write-up, but none of those paragraphs has a separable theme. It's all one big piece, and it doesn't fit into your short-term memory. The result is we say, this needs a lot of work. This looks like a data dump. Our writer would say, what do you mean data dump? I spent a lot of time organizing it. I organized it carefully, and I put in only the stuff I thought you would need. This is the main reason, I believe, why we can write something, believe we've organized it carefully, and have somebody else read it and say, I don't get it. Because we get to write out of our long-term memory. We're in the house. We can access all this stuff. We can hold an infinite amount of information as we move. But our readers have to read out of this short-term memory. They can only hold a small amount of information. We think and write in long-term memory, but we read and listen in our short-term memory. And if you don't package your document for the short-term memory, you'll lose. You'll lose just like this writer did. And since we write out of our long-term memory, we can often have a hard time figuring out what's easy enough for our readers. This is a difficult task, but I think this is one of the most important things that I can tell you about, because it tells you what you're up against. You can't make this short-term memory go away. It's there. Physiologically, we're stuck with it. Researchers are looking at ways to say, can we expand this thing? And, well, people may be able to expand it slightly. No, too many years of evolution have created our brains working this way. Our brains really aren't very good adapting to the information age this way. Now, besides the short-term memory, readers may have another limitation. They may have less expertise than you do. In the past 20 years, there's been a lot of research into looking at how readers and people learn based on whether they are experts or non-experts. A lot of this research got started looking at chess experts, you know, the kind of grandmasters that can lock in, play 100 people at a time, sitting around tables. The grandmaster walks up to the first table. The first player, who is an experienced chess player, not a novice, that person has made a move. The grandmaster looks at the chessboard, makes a move, moves on to the next table. Same thing happens. The grandmaster goes around to all 100 tables, goes back to table 1. That person has made the second move. The grandmaster looks at that for another 2 seconds, makes a second move, and continues to play those games and plays them out, and in the course of maybe an hour or two, probably wins all 100 games. And so people were looking at that and saying, how do they do that? They found that these people were true experts. These were people who had spent so much time studying things that they had already learned the material. The retrieval took very little effort, and the thinking was at a very sophisticated level. These people would look at the board, and they wouldn't see pieces. They would see patterns. We acquire expertise of all kinds over time. And one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, relative to me, does my audience have the same degree of expertise in this subject, or do they have less? In the case of the Good Start example, for example, the writer of Good Start was the expert. That writer could look at what he or she had done and take a significant fact from what had been placed in paragraph 2, link it with something in paragraph 3, and would know that some of the rest of the stuff was just sort of, oh, by the way, information. We come to this as the non-expert. We're smart, but we're not an expert in this subject. We have to learn everything. And as a result, we can get bogged down. Okay, there's evidence that shows, for example, that experts can even learn stuff faster. Here's a quote from a book on cognitive psychology. There is clear evidence that the ability to acquire new facts about some domain depends a great deal on what one already knows. For example, researchers found that people who knew more about baseball were better able to remember descriptions of baseball games. They read a description of a half inning of baseball to people and later examined their memory. That doesn't mean they pried their heads open. It means they gave them a test. Here's what they found out. For the 98 game-relevant facts, the people with more baseball knowledge recalled twice as many, 24 versus 12. For the facts that weren't relevant to the game, the groups didn't show any difference in recall. Now notice that the drop-off is still fairly significant in both cases. 24 versus 12. It's that old thing about people tend to remember about 10% of what you tell them. Notice that experts are able to do that better. They can vacuum facts faster. To give you an example of what we might mean in this case, suppose there was a hit-and-run play, and that happened inning of baseball. Those of you who don't know baseball might say, well, sure, that's baseball. You hit the ball and you run. And the rest of us will stamp our feet and say, no, that's not a hit-and-run play, and we'll give you a long 5-minute explanation of what a hit-and-run play is, where the second baseman goes and where the shortstop goes and the like. Well, the people who knew about hit-and-run plays were able to remember those facts better. The people who didn't. For the facts that weren't relevant to the game, like maybe what the temperature was during that half an inning, or if you ordered something to eat, wasn't any difference. Readers can learn things faster. But more important is this quote. I want you to look at this one, because this one is the one that you are stuck with. Expertise in a particular domain does not guarantee that one is good at helping others learn it. In fact, expertise can sometimes hurt teaching, because many experts forget what is easy and what is difficult for students. Expertise in a particular domain does not guarantee that one is good at helping others learn it. In your writing situations now, when you stop and think about it, between you and your audience, who is the expert? In most cases, I think what you will find is you are the expert. This is the subject you've gone into. You know this subject perhaps better than anyone else. It's not that your audience isn't smart, but you have the expertise. That expertise is no guarantee that you're going to be good at helping others learn it, and it can get in the way. There's a second part of this quote. Recognizing this fact, some groups who design educational materials pair content area experts with accomplished novices whose area of expertise lies elsewhere. Their task is to continually challenge the experts until the experts' ideas for instruction begin to make sense to them. Now you might say, oh, that's interesting, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. No, it does. Groups who design educational materials, that's what you're in the business of, designing educational materials. When we are conveying complex new information, it better be a darn good educational material. And so we say, well, yeah, but I don't have these accomplished novices whose area of expertise lies elsewhere. For those of you in performance audit and evaluation agencies, you sure do. It's called the review process. Review does a couple of things. It makes sure everything is accurate, but it's also a bunch of people who maybe don't know as much about that particular subject as you do, looking at that and making certain that it makes sense to them. Research indicates that review is generally a good thing. Why? Because we all have writing weaknesses. We all have blind spots, and review can help us identify some of the things that we just can't see. Now, I've worked with a lot of people who tell me, you know, going to work for the legislature, I had to change my it was a learning experience because I had to write differently. And perhaps some of what I've told you about experts and non-experts will help explain that a little bit. As we learn to write, we're we're non-experts. This is true from the time you were in kindergarten. You held the pencil almost over your shoulder and you printed an E, and maybe you printed a word, and your teacher said, good job, it's on the line, and the E is facing the right direction. And then you moved up a couple of grades, and you wrote things, and your teacher said, good job, these are complete sentences, and the words are spelled right. And then you got to graduate school. You're still the non-expert writing to the expert. You're acquiring more expertise, but what you're basically demonstrating is, I can be an expert too. And for some of you, you may be writing in situations where you are writing to peers. You are an expert, and you are writing to experts. And what you see is that expert brains are capable of moving much more quickly. But for most of us, it's the opposite. We're now the expert, and we're writing to non-experts, not people who don't know things. They're experts in other fields. They're experts. Their expertise is there, but they don't know this subject to the degree that you know it. This is important to see. And every time you write something, I suggest that you stop and ask, where is my audience relative to me in terms of their expertise? And frankly, I don't think it's any disrespect to our audience to say they don't know as much as I do about this subject. Your brain is capable of doing things as a writer that your reader's brain is not capable of doing. You're in the house, they're on the shopping trip, and you can only do some things when you're on a shopping trip. Okay, so far we've seen three main limitations that we need to be aware of. Tendencies that we may have as earnest writers that clash with what busy readers want. The fact that we get to write out of long-term memory, but our reader has to read using short-term memory. And third, any limitations posed if your reader doesn't have the same degree of expertise as you do. Knowing these things is incredibly important. It tells you what you're up against. It tells you that this is what you have to get across, and I think is frankly part of the reason why about 31% of college graduates are able to read at the proficient level. It's hard to do. So, in the remaining time that we have, let's look at some strategies for dealing with these limitations. Now, in doing this, I'm going to flash something up on the screen for just a minute. It's a paragraph. See it? Okay, now I'm going to take it away. I'm going to ask you to read that in just a minute. But for some of you, you'll be able to read that because you're staring at your computer screen. If we have an accurate understanding of our audience, however, some of you are sitting in a room where there may be 100 people. You might have to get up, walk towards the front of the room, so you're going to be able to read this paragraph. This is one I didn't want you to have in advance. This is something I'm going to give you to read right now. Now, this paragraph was adapted from an out-the-door publication. It's an out-the-door publication, and I've actually simplified it quite a bit so it will fit on one screen. I will tell you, I will have to admit, when you read the paragraph, I pulled it out of context. There were other paragraphs around it. But I will tell you that it's the most important paragraph in the entire document. It was in the summary of the document. It's essentially the conclusion. What I want you to do is to read this and chunk it, that term that I gave you. That is to say in one sentence what you think it's trying to tell you. Okay? Now, I will give you about 3 minutes to read this and chunk it. Now, if you are able to do this really fast and you have access to a screen and you want to type in what you think to chunk in and send it, fine. Feel free to do that. But for all of those who are in groups, a group being any more than one person, what I'd suggest is don't worry about doing that. Form your chunk and then compare what you think this paragraph is trying to tell you with the other person, or with 2 or 3 or 4 people. Ready? I'm going to put the screen on, and I'm going to go silent for 3 minutes. For 3 minutes. So you've got that time to read it and chunk it and see what you think. And Okay, I'm going to come back on. If some of you are in large groups and you're standing around close to the screen or whatever, don't go back to your seats yet, because I'm going to give you something more to read. We were getting some comments coming back on the chat, and a lot of you have different ideas as to what this paragraph is trying to say, including comments like, yikes, I don't know what it's trying to tell me. If this paragraph did a good job, I'd expect that about 80% of you would come up with the same notion. You'd have roughly the same idea of what it was trying to tell you. 20% of you would be thinking about tomorrow or something like that, and you wouldn't get it. But I don't think we're probably anywhere close to that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put another paragraph, actually two of them in this case, and I'd like you again to read these two. I think you'll be able to read them a little more quickly and see if this version works better for you. Are you able now to understand what the writers were trying to tell you? And if you are, I know you've lost the other screen, but how much do you think has actually changed in this paragraph? I'll be quiet for about a minute and a half here while you absorb it. Okay, I'm back, and I think what we're hearing from our end, from those of you who are submitting responses, is this seems to work better. Somebody just said points are clear and make sense, 100% different. And how much changed? I think if you were to look at these, well, I'll show you how much changed. I'm going to put this on again, and the yellow, I hope that's coming across as yellow, but it's the first sentence in each of these two paragraphs, is what changed. None of the rest of the sentences really changed at all. It's all the same stuff. What we did was we broke it into two pieces. And each piece has got something that tells us where we're going. That was really a paragraph about two things. It was telling us that the department has got two options for doing this job and outlining some pros and cons for those, and then going on to say, regardless of which one you pick, get started now and make sure you build in accountability systems to it. There was a lot going on in that paragraph, and I think that that was probably a reason that was contributing to your discussions saying, no, I don't necessarily agree on what this is trying to tell me. I think if I said now, all right, what are they trying to tell you, you'd be saying, well, it's those first two sentences. Absolutely. That's exactly right. And this gets to this first strategy. It's making certain that you are chunking things for the reader. Now, the writers of the original, and remember, this is actually a simplified version of what went out the door, would say, well, I chunked it. It was all there. It was in one paragraph. That's my chunk. I'm giving you right now on the screen what I think is a pictorial version of what you looked at. And my response is, no, that's not a chunk. That's some stuff. That's a bunch of yellow stickies. It starts with the first factoid, moves on through to the last factoid. I don't know what the chunk is. I know what the pieces are. What we did with the second version was we took those yellow stickies and this is what we did with them. We put the chunks around them. The chunks are the boxes around the boxes, all right? And you've got to make sure that you do this. Now, again, this might sound, you think, well, okay, I know to do that. I know to do that. So he's not telling me anything new. I know I'm not telling you anything new. What I'm telling you is that as writers, we don't do it as often as we think we do. As an editor, as somebody who had to read thousands of drafts of reports, I'll tell you that I spend about half my time doing just this, making certain that the chunks are in place. I'm happy with people writing sentences that sound different from the way that I would write them. What I want to make certain is that the chunks are there. So our first strategy is to make sure that you create some chunks for the reader. Remember that lesson from the short-term memory. What we need to know is, where are we going? I'm not going to remember everything. Tell me where I'm going. Okay, so let's look at a second strategy. This one involves the handouts that you got. So if what you need to do now is to go to item number 2, the power grid paragraphs. If you have read these 3 paragraphs, what you have noticed is that there are just 3 versions of a paragraph. And I will tell you that for those of you with access to a computer screen, there is a vote coming up here fairly soon. But I need to set this up for you a little bit. These 3 paragraphs, assume that you have been asked by a legislative committee to address a question. How is our power grid system in this state? Do we have a problem or don't we? Power grid is of those high-power transmission lines that nobody likes in their backyard, but everybody likes because it allows us to toast things and run computers. Well, you've gone out to do some research, and what you found are really 2 things. One, right now we're okay. In the state where you are, things are fine. We could even lose a major transmission line, and things wouldn't go down the way they went down in the Northeast a couple of years ago. We're doing okay. But, and that the but is very strong, we have a problem 5 to 7 years out. The power demand is growing so much that we may not be able to take care of things in 5 to 7 years. That's a long time, but when you're talking about high-tension lines, you're going to have to decide where these things are sited. You're going to have to work through environmental impact statements. You're going to have to fight suits. So you have a problem on your hands. What you have are 3 versions of a paragraph. Your legislative committee has said, send us no more than 1 paragraph. You have 3 versions of a paragraph here. What I want you to do is to decide on your own which version would you send to the committee. It's a forced choice exercise. You may not like any of these paragraphs, but you're going to have to pick one. So pick the one that you think works as the best of the bunch. Many of you may not have access to be able to vote. That's okay. If you're in a group, what I want you to do is form your opinion of which one you would choose, get together with several other people, and then compare notes. If you find that you don't agree, see if you can talk them into your point of view. See if you can reach consensus as to which paragraph you would send. So the voting basically is on an A, B, or C level. Those paragraphs are labeled A, B, or C. Go ahead and lock in your votes. We'll come back to the vote in a little bit, but again, I'm going to give you at least 2 minutes to talk about this and to see if you can reach agreement. So, and as far as the chat, don't worry about telling us why you think your choice is the best option. That's just for your discussions. But go ahead and vote, and we'll come back in about 2 minutes and see where you ended up. Okay, let's get back together. For those of you who have been voting and are just sitting there individually staring at your screens, you are probably been drumming your fingers to say, okay, let's get on with it. For those of you who are in groups, if your experience is anything like some of the groups when I do live workshops, you're just getting warmed up on trying to argue about which version you think is the right one. Kurt, are you at a point where you can post these results for us?
Yep, sure can. Let's go ahead and bring them up here. There you go.
Okay. And what you see is we don't have a lot of agreement here. We've got votes for all three. All three. And for those of you who have been in discussions, you probably have been doing the same thing. Put any group of people together, and you'll probably get votes for each one. I've had, when I've done this sort of thing live, I've had tables come to agreement on the version. But the version that they agree on is not necessarily the version that the table next to them agrees on. We can spend a lot of time arguing about this. In fact, I've had some groups where when we've done this, participants have spent every break after that arguing about their particular choice. And we can find attributes for each one. Each one might have some things that make it a good paragraph, or the one that you would choose. But what I want to do is to step back from this now. What you've seen here from the voting is that, you know, you've got one that you think is the right one, and a sizable number of people would say, no, you've chosen the wrong one. My right one is this one over here. But I think we're all in agreement. We've got the same paragraphs here, right? I mean, they're the same sentences. We haven't changed the sentences themselves. What we've changed is the order of the sentences, and we've moved one word around. For those of you who work in the audit business, we've used your favorite word, the word however. It will be on your tombstone when you die. However, yes. But since they are all the same information, we have just redistributed them a bit, don't they mean exactly the same thing? Don't they convey the same message? And I think as you think about it, you would say, no, I don't think they do. I think that they convey different messages. They have different ideas and different opinions, and this gets us into something that researchers found. The placement of the ideas in this paragraph seems to matter. Placement seems to matter. The tone, the message that you carry away from version 1 is much different from the tone that you carry away from version 2 or version 3. When researchers were studying the short-term memory, they made an observation that they called the primacy effect. What they found was that the first thing people got was what they remembered most. Not only that, it was a kind of prism through which they viewed the rest of the material that they were going to get. In fact, as one researcher put it in a book, researchers have found that subjects' abilities to process a paragraph differ dramatically, depending on whether they've been provided with a title or a relevant picture to look at beforehand. Somehow, what people get first has a huge effect. And this relates to the second strategy. The first strategy was make sure that you tell people out loud what you're trying to tell them. This strategy involves, where are you going to put that statement? I wanted you to have to wrestle with two different ideas, and in some cases, for those of you who are involved in discussions, the fight about which idea to put first, not because I was trying to say you always put the bad news first or vice versa, but to say, no, recognize the importance of what you say first. The paragraph that's up there on the screen right now, you're having a very hard time reading. Probably the only thing you can read is the first sentence. This is where people are paying attention, the place they look for a key to where they're going. For those of you who have a screen with good enough resolution to read the rest of it, you're going to find it's in Latin. Why? Because it's my way of telling you all sentences are not created equal. When you're dealing with the short-term memory, that first sentence matters incredibly. So my suggestion to you is make sure you're using that first sentence for the maximum amount of power. Sometimes when we're writing, that's the sentence where we clear our throats. Okay? That's not going to work. That's the one time that you know you've got them. Okay? Don't give that position up without a fight. Another thing that the researchers discovered when they looked at short-term memory was that people tended to remember the last thing they heard. And they call that the recency effect. And we can apply that as well. So I'm going to go to my paragraph, and I'm going to add one little sentence on the end that says, this is the next most significant place, the place they're looking for a summation if you didn't provide it at the beginning. Now, sometimes you might have to put the point at the end because it's going to require context and setup. The danger of that approach is that readers may not make it to the end. So my recommendation to you, if at all possible, take that chunking item and stick it up front. Now, in general, it tends to be at the end more often in academic writing, where I think we can depend on our audience a little more. We know that they're going to be reading this fairly thoroughly. It tends to be more at the front in the kinds of documents that we like to send out the door because we can't depend on that audience. We want to nail that point as early as we can. This may, again, be something you know already, but I hope what you understand now is this is solid and research-based, and if you don't do it, your ability to teach is going to go down. The second strategy, then, capture the point of each chunk in a statement, putting it up front if you possibly can. Now, so far I've been using paragraph-level things, topic sentences, really, sort of thing that we call these, to illustrate these chunking organizers. But I don't want to leave you with the idea that there aren't other kinds of organizers. Topic sentences are one sort of thing that predicts where we're going to go, but there are plenty of others. Summaries. Wouldn't it have been nice and good start to have some kind of summary up front, either a better title or a quick summary? Headings. Wouldn't it have been nice to have some headings so if the first one said background and I didn't want to read background, I could skip it and I could go to the thing I needed. Headings and subheadings and graphics, all of those things, too, are these kinds of organizers. Readers depend on them. They matter a lot. Now, I asked you to vote on those three paragraphs, and I said this is a forced choice exercise. You have to accept them as they are. I think if we were to resolve this, I would probably go back to paragraph B, and I would figure out some way to put the first two sentences together. You might want to go back and take a look at those two sentences and see how you would do that. And when you did that, you would discover that you had the main point, which is really two things, up front, and you had a nice ending point that tended to reinforce that. I'm sure there are probably other things you could do to fix the paragraph, but that would be my short-term fix. I wanted you to fight, though, about which thing to put first so that I could make clear in your brains the importance of what you say first. Don't give that first sentence up without a fight. Okay, that leaves us with one more strategy to cover, and that's the third item that you received in advance, the paragraph labeled cost center paragraph. So if you're busy trying to figure out the way to fix item 2, put that aside for a while and grab the cost center paragraph. Okay? And a number of you have already read it. You will find in this paragraph no bottom line. This is simply a descriptive paragraph. Let's assume it's got to be in a longer document, and its purpose is to explain how school districts report their costs to the state so they can get reimbursed. It's important for readers to understand this information so that they can go on and navigate the rest of the document. Spend about a minute, perhaps reading it, getting a sense of what it tells you. I'm not looking for anything very specific here. Just what are your impressions of that paragraph? Do you think it works? What do you learn from it? Read it, and if you're in a group, spend a little bit of time talking about what that is. I'll go silent here, but only for a minute or so. Okay, I'm back. Now, I don't know exactly what your impressions are. It is a rather carefully organized paragraph, but let's say at this point, we just dropped this. I said, fine, you've read a paragraph. And another 12 or 15 minutes goes by. It's the very end of the webinar, and I say, okay, sorry, there's a final exam. You got to pass a final exam question, or if you don't, you just have to listen to George Carlin's monologue over and over and over again until you get it. Okay? And the question is this. On that paragraph you read, how many cost centers were there? And I think probably everybody just says, good, 4. Got that question right. All right. Suppose the question was different, however, and you have to think about this. From now on, don't look at the paragraph. All right? Name the 4 cost centers. And I think it's going to be a little tougher for you to pass that. Let me give you a third version. Name the 4 cost centers in order of size. I think some of you are going to be listening to George Carlin over and over and over again. What happened was you approached this paragraph, and how much learning went on? Some learning went on. What learning went on was 4. That's not a high degree of learning. If this is an important paragraph where these concepts need to be gotten across, this paragraph doesn't do it very well. The third thing that we need to worry about, the third strategy, involves once you've got a chunk, how much stuff are you trying to put in there? How much stuff? And this paragraph gets so much stuff going on that we have a general sense of where it's going and what it's trying to tell us, but we haven't learned a great deal. Take about 30 seconds and think about, some of you have because you have chatted a response back to us. If you gave the writer some advice about how he or she might organize this material, what would you tell them? And let's assume that one thing you can't tell them is omit anything. Let's suppose all of this stuff needs to be said. How would you go about doing it? Take 30 seconds to think about it or talk about it. I'll be back. Okay, good solutions coming across from many different people, talking about tables, charts, things like that. Suppose the writer said, I'm constitutionally opposed to tables. I won't put them in. Oh, what would you do? Well, if that were the case, I certainly think tables and charts are good here, but if you couldn't do that, maybe you would grab the first sentence. The first sentence is a fine sentence. Start it out that way and say, fine, you're telling me there are 4 cost centers. What I want underneath that sentence are 4 bullets. In each case, name me the cost center and define it for me. That's as much as I want. What you see on the chart right now is what the writer was trying to do in that one paragraph. That's just too much stuff. But the top might work as a paragraph to say those are the 4. Then go on to say 2 of these are much bigger than the other 2 and discuss some of the material. Find some themes. Write around 3 or 4 different themes. You can say all this stuff. It's just important, knowing what you know about the short-term memory, not to say so much that the reader gets overloaded and the net result is they dump everything. Make certain that things stay somewhat bite-sized. That's the other important thing to remember with all of this. Okay, so where have we been? We're just about to the end of the workshop. Now, let's talk about what those principles are again. Help the reader by creating chunks. That's what we looked at when I gave you that paragraph and asked you to read it, the paragraph about the Park Service lodges. There were no chunks there. People put the information up and said, they'll get it. They'll understand it. That was an out-the-door paragraph, the most important paragraph in the document, and you didn't understand it. I don't tell you that to say, my goodness, don't we have some organizations that are kind of inept out there? No, I tell you that was an out-the-door paragraph because I want to remind you about how hard this is. I'm not talking about rocket science here. And you might say, yeah, you're talking about no-brainers. These are things as writers that we forget to do because we are thinking and writing out of long-term memory, and we forget to do what readers need to be able to get this material in their short-term memories. Once you've made sure that you've got information chunked, capture the point of each chunk in a statement. Put that statement up front if you possibly can. Many times when you draft, it's not going to occur to you there. Drafting is often a process of starting with the first factoid in a paragraph, getting finally to the point. Good. You know, make sure your thoughts are logical, but take a look at that and see, can I move it up front? Recognize the importance of that primacy effect. It's what readers are looking for, and it's how you can teach them. And then finally, don't overload the chunk with so much information that a reader can't handle it. It really is important here to see that readers are not capable of very much. I remember a discussion. I happened to be walking down a hall. This was in an organization I worked in, and I happened on a very loud discussion between a writer and a supervisor. The supervisor was having trouble with what the writer had written, and the writer, who had a rather high opinion of what he had written, basically said, "I can't believe you're that dumb," to his supervisor. I had two reactions to that. The one I remember having at the time was, that's kind of a career-limiting thing to say. But the second one, which I think I formulated over time after learning about this short-term memory stuff, is no, that's exactly right. That supervisor is not the expert. Okay, he's the expert in a lot of stuff, but in terms of what that writer went out to do, that writer's the expert. The writer was exactly right. What he should realize is, I didn't package that in a way that someone else who has not the same degree of expertise, someone who has to read it out of the short-term memory, can handle. Readers are not capable of keeping up with us as writers, and what we have to learn are these kinds of things that help us slow down, help us put the roadmaps in place, and make certain that things stay on track. Okay, just about finished here. And a couple of things to think about. You might say, everything he's talked about here is self-evident. I know it. I don't know that I've learned anything new here, except I got a couple of new terms. Well, I don't think I'm telling you a lot of things that you may not already know. And if you say it's self-evident, I say, good. Then make sure you do it. Because my experience as a writing coach, as someone who has looked at thousands of drafts over the last 30 years, what I found is that while writers are generally aware of these ideas, they often fail to put them in the documents. Sometimes it's a matter of time. I just don't have time. But often it's just that people forget. We don't need these organizers. We don't often need topic sentences ourselves because we know where we're going. You have to make that obvious to the reader. Your chances aren't that great. Remember what the statistics that we saw at the beginning. Now you're probably looking at the screen and wondering, what in the world is he talking about when it comes to golf? All right. Well, we just finished a big weekend of golf in the country. A lot of us looked at golf on our TV screens, in part because Tiger Woods was involved and it even made the nightly news. Some of you golf, many of you may not. But golf is a sport that looks ridiculously easy. All you do is hit the ball with the end of a stick. Okay, and the ball just sits there. Doesn't roll away from you. Nobody's throwing it at you. No 300-pound lineman is trying to knock you over. Everyone is respectfully quiet. You get to take practice swings. It's as easy looking as it can be. But when sports people get together and talk about what's the most difficult sport to play, they often settle on golf. Something about golf the motor activity that's involved and everything else makes it so difficult that it is simply an incredibly difficult thing. Maybe the hardest sport that there is. And you know from watching any golf or golfing yourself that good players can hit the most incredibly bad shots. That they're, one hole, everything is down the fairway, it's in, it's an eagle, it's a birdie, and wow, that's great. Next hole, they tee the ball up and the ball's in the water. Good players hit bad shots. One of the difficulties is that our brain actually, as we're doing something like golf, works against us. You know, if you golf, or if you know people who golf, that one of the things they do is they go out and practice a lot. Going to go out and hit a bucket of balls. Going to learn to do the same thing over and over and over and again. What researchers have found is that our brains don't like to do that. Our brains say, wait a minute, that's insect behavior. That's what keeps a fly on the window, stuck there, because the fly can't figure out how to get away. I'm not going to let you turn into an insect. I'm going to develop coping strategies for you. So your brain, for trying to do repetitive tasks, is often trying to learn things in different sorts of patterns. Your brain's actually working against you. Well, I'm going to put the other side of the slide up now, because now we're going to be talking about writing. Writing is something that looks ridiculously easy. We've been doing it for years and years and years. This is probably the oldest skill that you have. I have grandchildren now, and my 2-year-old grandson wrote. He didn't really write, but he sat up there at the table with his sisters and made marks on a piece of paper, and he knew that writing was something different from drawing a picture of a person. It went from left to right across the screen. So why is it so hard? It is hard. When cognitive scientists get together and talk about what is the hardest mental activity, the one that they tend to pick, as I told you at the beginning, is the very thing that you are trying to do, day in, day out. Writing complex technical information for people who are in a hurry. Good writers can go awry on this. You'll get it right one time. The next time you'll find people looking at what you have written and saying, I don't get it. When they tell you that, do your best to find out where did learning stop? Why weren't you able to learn from this document? Good reviewing should be focused on why I was able to or was not able to learn from that material. And finally, as you've seen, our brain can actually work against us here. You need your brain. The house, that long-term memory is a great spot. That's what you get to write out of. But don't get tricked into assuming that your readers are operating from the house. They're out on a shopping trip. They're in that short-term memory. And if you give them stuff from the house, I can guarantee you, you're going to lose every time. So I'm going to leave you with one quote, one thing to think about at the end. You'll see that this quote is from E.B. White, and some of you even have this book, The Elements of Style, sitting on your desk, because it's probably the best known and the most widely circulated book about writing in terms of what makes good, clear, coherent writing. E.B. White, who also wrote, by the way, books like Stuart Little, Charlotte's Web, and The Trumpet of the Swan, and maybe was the best essayist of the 20th century in English. In his little section of that write-up that talks about, be clear, this is the way I think he ends this section. He says, so when you say something, make sure you've said it. The chances of your having said it are only fair. That's what I have to leave you with. It looks obvious to you, but the chances of your having said it are only fair. The writing is something that you just continue to learn about day after day. I hope that what I've given you in these 90 minutes is a sense of that, a sense of what you're up against, of what you have to deal with, a sense of what you have to do to win, and some techniques for doing so. With that, I think my presentation's come to an end.
Thank you, Stan. This is Kay Warnock. If anyone has any quick questions, we'll take those in the chat real quickly, and then we will sign off. We're also going to put up a closing slide for you that has my email address if you have questions or if you want contact information to invite Stan to speak at your offices, because he does do an all-day webinar that's, or not webinar, but seminar that's quite good. The answer to the question on the copy of the slides, there actually will be an archived version of this webinar that's going to be on our website next week. And so once it is available, I will email you all a link. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions left. Thank you very much. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day.
And ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude your session for today. We thank you for joining, and you may now disconnect and enjoy the rest of your day.